Hello everyone, today I'm going to be discussing Big Brother 10 and I've been looking forward to rewatching the season for a very long time. Once I got into it, it just reminded me of all the joyous moments and the feelings that I've had every time that I've rewatched it in the past. Especially the first half of the season where it's some of the most electric Big Brother ever. But once we got into the second half of the season, it was honestly a lot more boring than I remembered. So I don't know if this will cause me to rank the season a bit lower than many other people would or not. But I think this is the very, very first season since Big Brother 3 where there's absolutely no twists in the casting, and there really weren't any twists at all in the season, since it is a back to basic season, and because they had to use a lot of their budget on Big Brother 9, which was done a few months earlier. The cast for the season really brought the meaning of all walks of life back into meaning, which hasn't really been a thing since Big Brother 3, and it wouldn't be a thing again, really, until the season that is airing right now in Big Brother 25, as it, BB3, BB10, and BB2 have some of the most oldest medians for the age pertaining to Big Brother casts overall. I really like that everyone was trying to play the game and they were playing hard, and whether they were playing well or not, they were still playing their asses off, which isn't something that we see in many seasons, unfortunately. So for week 1, I think it's a pretty good week 1, as we see a power play happen in the very first week, and it's very rare for there to be a group of people completely take over from another group of people or another person who was doing well, seemingly within the first few days of the season. So for the intro puns, we have Jerry talking about not being the typical grandfather. April knows how to handle the men, which is very foreshadowing. Dan talks about how he's going to school the house guests. Libra is a mother like no other. Steven talks about hanging on to the end since he's a gay rodeo champion. Rennie talks about how she is the party since she is a New Orleans woman. Ollie is a preacher's son who is ready to let loose, which he definitely did in the season, if you know what I mean. Brian doesn't like to lose. Memphis' street smarts and charm will make a potent cocktail since he is a mixologist, which is in quotation marks. Angie is newly single and is ready to have a new start, and I wonder if she and Memphis were supposed to showmance in the producer's eyes. Keisha knows how to work it. Since she's a Hooters girl, Jesse is going to crush the competition since he is a bodybuilder. You don't mess with the Portuguese Eastern girl that is Michelle. Libra and Dan were clearly supposed to fight over the political beliefs, though Dan has since admitted that he faked it to get on the show. And Keisha and Memphis also talk about showmancing. The first HOH is set up where each of the house guests have to choose someone they want to win the HOH based solely on first impressions, and this is done before they move into the house, and they are not allowed to talk to one another. Rennie does not make a good first impression once they all enter the house, and Ollie talks about not drinking or swearing, though the last one will definitely be disproven during the season. Libra talks about being a mother, which will come up a lot during the season, and is proud of having biracial kids who look all over the place. Steven doesn't disclose that he is gay, Dan immediately gravitates towards Brian, Ollie gravitates towards April, who ends up having her real boobs touched by Jerry. Memphis ends up winning the Ventures book card due to the luxury competition, and it's revealed that Jerry is the first HOH. Memphis winning this luxury prize will have a target on him throughout the season. Brian and Dan immediately link up and talk about how they want to bring Ollie in, which Dan works on. We have the infamous Jesse and Rennie argument, where Rennie makes a bunch of noise as a bunch of people are trying to go to sleep, as she's talking about how the door was locked. Jesse wakes up and complains about it, and Rennie ends up going to the washroom, where he approaches her about it. She tells him to lighten up about it, and then apologizes, but he mentions that it's why he's up, while taking digs at her age in the diary room, and Rennie calls him an embarrassment in the diary room. More people call Rennie a loony, and Brian is able to convince Jerry to nominate Jesse and Rennie, and they also have a bond about being in the service, though Jerry initially mentioned targeting Memphis and potentially nominating Dan, but Brian convinced him otherwise pertaining Dan. Jerry nominates Rennie and Jesse for eviction. Brian makes it clear in the diary room that he is using and exploiting Jerry, where the latter thinks he and Brian are going to the end together. Rennie thought that the incident was nothing, and Jesse is very annoyed about it all, since he has still not apologized. She asks him about what they did, and he mentions that he isn't going to give her anything, where he speaks to Jerry about it, who then goes on a monologue that is ridiculous. and Jesse couldn't look any less interested. Rennie talks crap and calls Jesse a weasel who told Jerry some BS. As Jesse walks by, she calls him a wuss, essentially. He approaches her, and then she mentions some random comments where she mentions that he continues to walk away. They both continue to argue when everyone is in Jerry's HOH room, as Jessie claims that she never apologized, though the flashback says otherwise, but it was most definitely an insincere one. Rennie calls him an inherent liar and how she can't take liars, and how he has a forked tongue, or was it a pork tongue? I don't really get what she was trying to say here. Brian tells Michelle that he had an influence on Jerry's HOH, I don't know why he would admit this to people, and talks with Ollie about how Rennie is going to self-destruct, but it makes sense to vote out Jesse. He tells the same thing to Angie about how influential he is, while also having the same conversation with Stephen as well as to Memphis, though Memphis wasn't here. The conversation, which Brian definitely notices. Brian tells Dan that Jerry was going to nominate him, and he mentions that he has enough votes to do anything he wants, and no one else is playing the game. Oh, that aged so well. I forgot to mention that Brian didn't like how Memphis took the conversation, and we have the start of April and Ollie's showmance. Jesse ends up winning the veto, and Brian is threatened by how Memphis performed in the veto competition, so Brian is pushing for Memphis to go home, which Dan is in agreement with. It seems like Jerry is convinced. Funny how Memphis is the big threat, where Michelle performed better than him in the competition. Ollie speaks to the coven of Keisha, Libra, and April about how he has all of them, and Brian then enters the room to give the same speech, mentioning that Memphis is a goner. As soon as the men leave, Libra and April immediately call Brian out for trying to beat Dr. Will, and Libra calls out Dan, Brian, and Ollie being in an alliance who wants to take the strong guys out than the girls. Keisha ends up relaying this to Michelle and Angie, and we see another conversation where April and Libra talk about how Ollie is the wingman, and April really likes Ollie. Libra mentions that after Jesse and Memphis, they will be next, but when Ollie enters the washroom, or comes in the washroom, the woman confronts him about his alliance, and he can't even lie about it. They really run over Ollie in this conversation, where they call him out for agreeing with Brian all the time, though he says that he isn't against them, and April tells him that she doesn't want to look like a stupid-ass bitch. Ollie tells them the truth in the storage room, and is willing to turn on Brian, because this will sink his game. Ollie tells Memphis that Jerry was going to put him up, and Memphis tells Jesse that he is in danger. So overall, they speak to more people in the house, which includes Michelle, and 9 people rally together. Actually, no, 8 people rally together, and end up pressuring Jerry to nominate Brian, though he was heavily resistant at first. Somehow, Brian has told people that he wants Michelle out in week 2 and Libra out in week 3, from what I could get from a few comments around me during this conversation. Jesse vetoes himself off the block, and Jerry nominates Brian as the replacement nominee, making sure that he isn't wearing his military gear, since he knew that he was breaking his word. Brian and Dan are shocked, and Brian speaks to Jerry, who ends up telling him that Ollie was the one who ring-led everything. Brian tells Dan this, and he is shocked that Ollie, of all people, would do this. The two of them speak to Ollie, who mentions that April, Keisha, and Libra knew about the alliance, where Dan mentions that he planned to play dirty, but now he can't imagine stabbing people in the back and breaking his word, where Ollie mentions that he is like that. Remember all this for later, and it's very ironic. Brian sees April as the big mastermind, as she has the girls and Ollie in her back pocket. Brian campaigns to Stephen, who is receptive to Brian in general. Brian decides to hold a puppet show, since it will make people sad that he is leaving, which will hopefully cause people to keep him, as the puppet show mocks the house guests. Stephen, Angie, Dan, and Memphis are a part of it, and we see Angie campaign to Keisha, where she mentions that keeping Brian will help them get rid of the drama in the house. As we will see throughout the season, Angie is one of those girls that are quote-unquote not like the other girls. Remember this all for later. April and Libra see the conversation, and they know something is up, as Jesse sees the conversation as well. They are all in the backyard, where Jesse and April mention that Angie is working for Brian to stay. Keisha yells that it's obvious that they're talking about her, and April tells her to get in her face to tell her what the problem is, whereas the house has to console the two of them, and this will be the start of the coven's problems. April is crying in a room, and Libra tells Rennie to prepare to go home, just in case. Brian is evicted in a 9-1 vote. I definitely do think that Ryan has some potential in the game, but from what I researched, he apparently only watched Big Brother All-Stars, and that clearly wasn't the best vantage point or the best reference, since very few seasons are like All-Stars. But clearly he played way too hard, way too fast, and he knew that he did, so at least he had that accountability there. He definitely had some charisma in the diary room, so I definitely see his loss as being kind of a big one, but him going here made the season a lot more interesting than it probably would have otherwise been. I definitely see why production was interested in bringing him back in the next season and even had him come back in this season as a cameo, though we would never see him again as a player. While I do think that week 2 is the weakest week out of the pre-jury or even the first half of the season, I still think it's a pretty solid and entertaining week all on its own. Jerry and Rennie start to get snippy with one another after the vote due to Jerry deflecting from turning on Brian. Dan remained loyal, and Steven is sad, and Libra is elated that her plan went through, and Jesse is also glad that Brian went home. Jesse ends up winning HOH and is thinking about getting revenge on Rennie, though people like Steven, Rennie, and Angie aren't happy. Jesse notices that things immediately got divided, with Dan, Angie, and Steven on the other side. Memphis and Jesse talk about their allegiance to one another. Dan is ready to go on the block, and Steven thinks that he may be safe, though he is very naive about what is about to happen, or at least that's what Dan tells him. April and Libra want Steven out and to nominate him with Angie, and April tells Michelle and Libra that she wants Angie out before Steven. Jesse gets his HOH room, where he rambles on and on about his posing and bodybuilding pictures, and most of the house, simply put, doesn't give an F. Steven didn't go to the HOH room because he just simply put didn't care, and Jesse sees this as disrespectful, and honestly, I kind of agree with Jesse, since I don't recall this ever really happening in Big Brother history. Most of the 8 remain in the HOH room, and Jesse mentions that he's putting up Rennie, while all of them yell, "No!" and telling him that Steven needs to go up. They talk about Keisha switching sides, right as she's talking to Angie about not wanting to be a catty girl, which, too late, Keisha! Jerry talks about his wife of 54 years having Parkinson's, and she told him beforehand to put her in a nursing home to make life easier for him. Dan and Steven have a conversation about the latter being gay, and a story essentially, as Keisha is present in this conversation, where he dated women in the past but it just didn't work, but he moved away where he became happier in his truth. It's been a while since we had conversations like this on the show, where it was a consistent thing in the first era of Big Brother. Jesse and Angie speak in the HOH room, where she does not want things to be awkward like they were in the last few days, but he calls her out for trying to campaign for the guy to stay who wants himself, Michelle, and Memphis out. We learn here that Angie is in an alliance with the other 3, and Jesse mentions that he isn't just a muscle guy, though that's what he wants the others to think he is. We see more of Steven and Keisha bonding, and we have the have-not competition, where Libra and April are upset that the 2 older people are on their team. Put a pin on this, which Keisha notices. April and Libra were pissed off about losing the have-not competition, and they start snipping at one another, since they were on top last week, and of course people talk about their actions. Dan goes in the HOH room to hope that Jesse speaks to him, but he just gets stuck in the washroom, since Ollie walks in again. Libra and April are curious about Memphis being hard to read, so they want to know if Memphis gets emotional, where he talks about his ex-girlfriend and his father dying, where he also left him when he was young. He talks about his current relationship, and when he falls hard, he does, but he doesn't want to show a weak side. And it's interesting watching this conversation, knowing that he is now married to Christmas, and seeing how that happened on Big Brother 22, where I haven't watched BB10, or rewatched BB10, since before Big Brother 22. So, it gives a different sense of insight there. Dan does speak to Jesse, where he tells him that he's expecting to go up, but he remained loyal to Brian. But he's open in the future, but Jesse respects how Dan handled everything, and he wants to work with Dan. Jesse nominates Steven and Dan for eviction. Jesse makes a mention of Steven waiting 24 hours to speak to him, and missing his HOH room, though Steven lies about being asleep at the time, though everyone knew that he wasn't up since they saw him through the camera. Jesse tells Dan that Steven is shooting himself in the foot, and he's looking forward to their upcoming alliance, and Angie speaks to Steven, who doesn't take the nomination well, and Angie realizes that she has to distance herself from Steven, and everything associated with Brian. Remember this for the future. Michelle ends up painting Jesse's toenails, and they try to make it seem like they're engaging in the showmance, though they're literally talking about Jesse's girlfriend. Memphis speaks to Jesse about how the 8 are going to turn on one another eventually, as they are a duo, but wants to enter a foursome with Michelle and Angie, which they approach Angie about. Rennie speaks about Hurricane Katrina and how it affected her, and Stephen also went through it as well, so it gives them a bond in that aspect, where they weren't close at all in any other way. Keisha wants to campaign for Steven to win the veto and for him to stay, and he asks her if she wins the veto, would she use it on him? Keisha knows that she can't win it, but she does want him to win it. Keisha pitches for Steven to stay to the Coven and Michelle, and as soon as they leave, the three women talk about how they don't trust her and she is playing both sides. But of course, this all gets blamed on Libra, and it's interesting how Michelle is somewhat close to that alliance here, and this is an important note to remember for the future. Michelle tells this to Jesse in Memphis, where she mentions that she wants Keisha out soon. During the veto competition, the others notice that Keisha is trying really hard to win, but Michelle ends up winning the veto. Jesse, Memphis, and Angie talk about Keisha's shadiness in the competition, and Keisha is annoyed with Libra, who isn't trusting Keisha due to perception, and rightfully calling Keisha out. Stephen tells Keisha that Libra was talking about Keisha in the HOH competition, as well as the others. Keisha talks about this to Rennie, and they all talk a crap about how Libra needs to go, since Keisha will be backstabbed by Libra in a minute. Keisha confronts most of the 8 about the people talking about her and how she would use the veto, though she claims that she never would have, and Libra mentions that she needs to say who it was, though Keisha never does this. Keisha claims that she wanted to prove herself, and Jesse was still confused about it. And honestly, this is just a prime example of Keisha's victim mentality, which will continue throughout the rest of the season. Libra mentions that she said she might have used it on him, and Keisha said that it's a dumb move game-wise, so she really likes Stephen, but he would never do that, or she would never do that. Keisha then throws Libra under the bus and mentions that she's the one causing all the drama in the house, claiming that she's the one spreading that Keisha is campaigning for Steven to stay, though Keisha was campaigning for him to stay, and people outside of Libra noticed it. Memphis and Jesse seem like they're intending on backdooring Libra, which, as we later see, wasn't really the case. Keisha trashes Libra about being a troublemaker who's trying to look good, and Rennie tells Jerry that Libra was talking about him during Have Not competition. Jerry decides to confront Libra about her calling him and Rennie slow and old during the Have Not competition, and she claims that she never did. He says, "Yes, she did," and she says, "No, I did not!" And she screamed because he screamed. It's all about semantics, since she did call them old, but not slow and old, where Libra mentions that she just wanted the teams to be more balanced. She is pissed off that she's awoken with the bullshit, as she stomps around the house yelling, "Who said it? Who said it?" And it causes for her and Rennie to go back and forth, since Jerry throws Rennie under the bus. She tells the other girls that Rennie said it, which causes Rennie to slam her cup down and confront her, so they argue where everyone else leaves the room. Despite the seeming push to make Libra the replacement nominee, as Stephen also pushes this to Michelle and Jesse, though Michelle mentions that he's the only one pitching this, which is a sign that it was a red herring, Michelle leaves the nominations the same. Dan knows that he is staying since everyone sees Stephen as a strong competitor, and Dan also threw the veto, as he's thrown most of the competitions, if not all of them, up to this point, and will continue to do so for the next several weeks. And Stephen doesn't want to campaign against Dan. Keisha regrets making an alliance with Ollie, Libra, and April, but she has no choice but to stick with them. Stephen makes his pitch to the alliance of 4 that was mentioned, and it's clear that this campaign was desperate, since he's under a cloud of Brian. Dan also mentions in the diary room that Stephen is coming off as more desperate in his campaign will make people want to evict him even more. Libra also mentions that the Alliance of 8 wants to pick off the floaters, which is Stephen, Dan, Rennie, and Jerry, over the next 4 weeks, and the 4 of them talk about Michelle being an informant for Jesse, and Angie is always with Memphis, which is why they didn't nominate her this week, and it's a good read on their part. They know that the Alliance of 8 is splitting up, and they need to get a floater to take out the other side. Angie talks to Memphis about how annoying April and Libra are, and he pretty much tells her that she needs to have a better poker face, but they need to keep the alliance for a bit longer, so they will be blindsided when the alliance is gone. Memphis and Angie are hoping to pull Dan in, and we have the Coven talking about how they don't like Angie, since she's always with Memphis, but they know that the 8 are going to target one another soon. Stephen is evicted in a unanimous 9-0 vote. Honestly, I think Stephen was one of the few duds in this season, especially as he kind of just was very mopey and whiny during the season, and apparently he made a lot of microaggressions on the feed, so of course I didn't like him on that element. When it comes to the game, he didn't really bond with most of the house guests, and when he did decide to play the game and to campaign, he just came off looking worse and worse. In general, I just don't think he would have offered much to the season overall, and I think he went at the perfect time for the evolution of the season. Week 3 is definitely a very good week, especially with the changing dynamics that happened here, and it would be a culminating week to what would involve some of the most memorable moments of the season overall, and that big alliance really starts to fall apart here. A lot of people did not care for Steven's final words, which were, "Suck it, bitches." Dan is glad that his strategy of appearing weak is working, and Keisha feels bad that she had to vote Steven out, but Angie feels like she can focus now on the game with Steven gone. Keisha wins HOH, and a lot of people feel safe. Some of it isn't worth it, as some of them shouldn't feel safe. But Keisha notices that Angie is not very happy, and Keisha is annoyed that Angie let Steven take the fall for everything. Though apparently the Coven bashed Angie a lot, and Angie bashed them as well, so this was kind of bound to happen, and some of it was personal, and that's why some of the house guests and the viewers thought that it was all about jealousy. Then through the HOH competition, and Keisha tells people that she doesn't know who she will put up, and it seems like herself and Libra made up from the disaster that was last week. The Alliance of 8 previously discussed that a combination of Jerry, Dan, and Rennie are going up and going home, but Keisha does not intend on sticking to that at all. Rennie is alone in the HOH room with Keisha, since they have become very close, where Rennie mentions that Libra is a backstabber who cannot be trusted, and she leaves when April arrives in the room, since Rennie doesn't like April either. Keisha tells April that she isn't going to do what the 8 wants, and Libra and Ollie follow them in their HOH room. Keisha tells them that she wants Angie up and out, mentioning that it is a personal choice since she hung Steven out to dry, and she will put all of them up. Though apparently according to the feeds, Libra and April were heavily convincing her to target Angie even before this. But apparently Keisha was also telling them that Angie told her that she was targeting April and Libra. So there's all that additional context there. Memphis is suggested as a target option by April, though Keisha mentions in the diary room that Libra is an option and she doesn't even know it yet. Keisha tells Memphis that she is putting Angie up and she doesn't let Angie enter the room, which is a really bad sign for Angie. Angie tells Michelle and Jesse that she's worried about going up, which wasn't the case earlier, though she notices that the same people that trashed Keisha are now her BFFs, and she's clearly referring to April and Libra. Memphis tells Jesse and Michelle that Angie is in trouble, and Jesse mentions that they need to bring up Libra. Keisha tells Dan that it was supposed to be him getting booted this week, but she isn't going to do that, and if she keeps him in the house, he needs to look out for her, where Dan is worried about making another promise, since it burned him with Brian. Keisha tells Libra that she felt close to her, but got annoyed that Libra kept doubting her, which Libra outright admits to her, and Keisha tells her that it hurts her. Libra mentions that she was targeting Keisha's friendship with Steven, but she can do whatever she needs to do and she will understand. Keisha tells her that all this stuff is making Libra a target, and Libra does apologize. So it seems like Libra realized her mistake, and if Keisha were to target Libra, she would understand. We have a segment about Michelle talking about Portuguese food and how they eat a lot of pig ears and other stuff like that, and this will come up in a Have Not competition in a few weeks. So we see more of Ollie and April's romance, and then we get a rare occurrence of April and Keisha getting along. And April throws Memphis under the bus again for winning the money and having the prize, and being Angie's ally, so she wants him gone. Jesse ends up having a conversation with Keisha, where she tells him that Angie is going up, and he is annoyed, where he also mentions that she should put up Libra, since the house will send her home. I wonder why Jesse didn't target Libra himself when he was HOH, just last week. Keisha doesn't want to put Libra up, since she will go home over Angie, and he suggests to nominate Dan and Libra. The way Jesse is going about this comes off as frantic, though he mentions that Libra will be frantic like Steven was last week, and this all leads to Keisha nominating Angie and Jesse for eviction. Keisha mentions that Angie was the one who approached her about keeping Brian, but she got a lot of that flagged, with Brian and Steven also going home. Jesse is angered, and Memphis thinks that Keisha made dumb moves with her nominations, since they were not after her. Michelle mentioned that she never trusted Keisha, and Jesse mentioned that she's clearly aligned with April, Ollie, and Libra, with Libra masterminding everything. Jesse mentions that she could be the replacement nominee, and Michelle mentions that she thought she was going up. Most of the house is upstairs talking about Jesse's temper and how Angie needs to leave. Jerry talks to Dan about Memphis being a good competitor, and he is a womanizer who should be more than a bartender at his age. Jesse decides to speak to Keisha, and he rants about Libra forcing him to target Steven and Dan. It wasn't just her doing this, and he mentions that it was April and Ollie, and it wasn't just them either. April and Libra try to cock-block the conversation, and the two of them continue to talk about Libra, though Jessie could have targeted her last week, but now wants someone else to do it, which tends to be the thing with this huge Libra target. Everyone wants her gone, but no one wants to do it themselves. April and Libra speak to Keisha, and they talk about Jessie's conversation with her. Jessie tells Michelle that if one of them wins the veto, Libra is gone, and he thinks he did something here. Jessie and Libra have a bit of a squabble after they are out of the veto competition, since he blames her for Keisha nominating him, and how Keisha made some mention of it in her speech. But Libra mentions that she said she would vote Stephen out because several people told her that he was after her, but she had no influence in Keisha nominating Jessie. Keisha ends up winning the veto, and the other crew come up with a plan to get Keisha to veto Jessie and to put up Libra, which Angie does that when she speaks to Keisha, since it would be ridiculous if the target asked the HOH to veto her, and she mentions that she hoped that their bond with Stephen would have them work together. Keisha and April talk about Libra not being very long for the game, pertaining her longevity and how she'll probably go home soon, and April mentions that she told Ollie that she doesn't trust Libra, so she's kind of a liability to their alliance. Ollie ends up joining and mentions the same talking points, since she is always whispering things to other people, this being Libra whispering things to other people. Keisha is said that she might have to put up Libra, and then Genty ends up speaking to Keisha again, where he comes off even more frantic than he did during the last conversation, which obviously isn't going to make Keisha want to veto him to put Libra up. He rants about losing 6 pounds in 2 days, how he's a persecuted victim, and has a bunch of weird puns and analogies. Jessie storms up again to Keisha to nominate Libra and comes off as even more aggressive and frantic than he just did in the last conversation that he had, and he's literally yelling at her because he cannot believe that she's going on a promise she made to Libra. If only he had this energy last week on his own HOH. Keisha tells Libra what happened about Jessie's conversation and how he is essentially becoming a lunatic, so Keisha interpreting to the entire house that she gave her word to Libra and she's not going to nominate her. Clearly the foursome don't get it, so conveniently a banner came by and they twist and lie to make it seem like it said Libra's a liar, love Stephen. Big Brother rushes them into the house since they aren't allowed to see banners, and I guess they changed that after Big Brother 8, so the four of them tell this lie to the entire house, with the fact that they ushered them in, which they didn't do in the past, and I wonder if they would have let Libra go up based on this, especially since it breaks the fourth wall. Memphis tries to twist it into Libra and someone else is a liar, and Libra outright asks Memphis why everyone is after her, and he wonders why people were after him 2 days into the game, and he mentions that he didn't target anyone other than Jerry. Jerry and Memphis end up going back and forth, where Memphis mentions Jerry calling him a womanizer. Jerry stands for a minute, and Memphis loses it. Since he's a married man who grabs April's boobs, and he wants to call him a womanizer? There's a lot more into this argument, which will carry into the next episode. Though Jerry might have been proven right about Memphis, especially since what happened with him and Christmas in Big Brother 22, so didn't really age well for Memphis pertaining this argument, and it aged very well for Jerry in this argument. Anyways, Keisha doesn't use the power of veto. Jesse now realizes that he is safe and he isn't going home, which Keisha was telling him all week. And Michelle breaks down to Angie, since she has to choose between two of her allies, where Angie tells her to vote with the house. And it's interesting that she says this, but it shows that Michelle and Memphis have never been close. We see the losing foursome talk about where they went wrong, which was when they didn't win the HOH or the veto, where Memphis brings up Jerry calling him a womanizer, since Jerry knows that he wants him out of the house. If you look at all their outfits in this conversation, this took place the same time as the banner mess, meaning that it happened before the veto ceremony, but are showing this after the ceremony on the episodes. Angie speaks to Jerry about he needs to stop kissing to the power, where he mentions that he has no say this week, but Memphis, Michelle, and Jesse got extremely cocky over the last week when Jesse was HOH, and Angie is shocked and bewildered by this statement. Angie reports the conversation to Michelle, who is bewildered that the same people who wanted Libra out last week are kissing her ass, and Michelle is shocked that Angie mentioned Jerry, saying that she was cocky and arrogant last week. This leads to Michelle and Jerry arguing, and they try to make it seem like Angie masterminded all this, when that's clearly not the case in reality. Michelle tells Jesse and Memphis that she's going to lose it on Jerry. Michelle calls out Jerry for talking about her. He mentions that anything she thinks he said, he said. She mentions that she heard him bring her name up and how he will go with the power every week. Jerry yells that he will not kiss her ass to the people who are gonna fuck him around, meaning Jesse, Memphis, and them. And Michelle yells that he got called out. He got called out for talking shit about her. Jerry yells that the four of them are ganging up on him. Jerry ends up defending Michelle, where he calls out Jerry out on a strategy. Jerry yells that he refuses to kiss Jesse's ass, and Jesse mentions that he knows where he will be if he wins HOH. What they didn't show in this argument about Jerry talking drunk about Michelle and getting called out for talking drunk and his drunk talking not working. What they didn't show during this on the episodes is that there is some mention of someone claiming that Jerry was touching and caressing Angie's leg, and that's why Jerry was really pissed off, though Michelle dismissed all of that, since she was talking to him about him specifically mentioning Michelle. So Jesse, Michelle, and Memphis predict that the other side will nominate Dan and Jerry if they win HOH again, and Jerry will be gone. An earthquake happens, but we then move on to, instead of them relaxing, Jesse decides to taunt Libra with passive-aggressive kisses through the window and giving her antagonistic waves about her going bye-bye. Libra reports this to her allies as they are all shocked that someone on the block is doing this, and Jesse refuses to kiss her ass. Libra knows that he will never say that to her face, and Rennie is also turned off by this, where they all mention that they can send him home now. Jesse calls Jerry for other time and making a weird elderly noise as they walk past one another, and Jerry is rightfully annoyed with this, so people are growing tired of Jesse. We see a conversation with April, Ali, and Libra talking about potentially voting Jesse out while they are going on a walk, so they should send him home. April and Libra approach Keisha about this idea, though they still want Angie out too, hoping that it will be a double eviction, where Keisha knows that Jesse will put her up. Angie is evicted in a unanimous 8-0 vote. While I don't think Angie is that bad of a player, especially for a pre-juror, she definitely has the chance to do a lot better, especially since she had the connections to the Memphis, Jesse, and Michelle side of the house, which is why she wasn't automatically linked into the Stephen and Brian group, but she just didn't do a whole lot with it, and I did find her to have a lot of I'm not like other girl, pick me mentality, and I do think that affected her game severely. But outside of that, she is clearly a nice person, but just wasn't interesting at all in the season, and was the biggest dud of the season, so not much to say about Angie overall. Week 4 is just classic Big Brother. It's one of the most classic weeks in Big Brother history, which says a lot since the show is almost 25 years old. Let's just get right to it. Michelle doesn't take Angie's eviction well. Dan does another competition, which Libra called out, and it's clear that it's everyone against Michelle, Jesse, and Memphis in this competition. It is an endurance competition. Dan gives motivational speeches to the others, which is a good social move, and it ends up with Michelle and April being the final two, where they end up making a deal. April propositions Michelle to drop, and she won't nominate Michelle or Jesse, which Michelle agrees to. The Coven congratulates and give April her props, and she tells the others that she made a deal with Michelle to not nominate her, since April wants Memphis out. Keisha is hanging out with Memphis a lot, as she likes him the most since Steven left, and he likes her the most since Angie left, and his alliance is sinking. And April is really pissed off, since she knows that April wants him out, and April vents to Libra about it, mentioning that she will put Keisha up if she tells Memphis any information, and Libra actually sticks up for Keisha since she learned her lesson from the last 2 weeks, mentioning that Memphis is latching on to Keisha because Angie just left. Rennie was at the table, and she tells Keisha this, where Keisha mentions that she should have put April up when she had the chance, and that she can't let Memphis get voted out, since she won't have a chance otherwise. They end up arguing about this next week, but they don't show it in the fight that happened right after Michelle's HOH in the episodes. Dan is the America's Player for the week, and mentions that he wants Libra nominated, which is very interesting, but it will be a hard sell, so he's hoping that Memphis is in the letter. But he cheers when he sees that America wants Jesse nominated, where he speaks to April about quickly. April found the conversation odd and tells her allies that something is off with Dan, where she thinks that he is America's player, which is true for this week, but this has and will continue to be an underlining thing with Dan the entire season. We have a segment with Dan and Michelle as he makes fun of how she says water. Keisha and Memphis talk about the same thing that happened with her and Steven is happening now, where Memphis goes out of his way to pitch an alliance with her. Memphis thinks that he will be nominated with Jerry or Dan, and mentions that Jesse is a part of the deal, which Keisha is shocked about since she wasn't told that. April went to Ollie about Keisha being disrespectful, since April saved Keisha's ass after her HOH last week, but Keisha is giving her no attention, and Ollie, of course, agrees with April. April nominates Memphis and Jesse for eviction. Memphis is not shocked with the nomination at all, since he would have nominated April had he won HOH. Jesse and Michelle are trying to make the best out of the situation and are reassured by April and Ollie. April doesn't care if Jesse is targeting her allies, since he isn't targeting her, which, great self-interest on April's part, though she shouldn't have made it so known to her allies throughout the week. Dan has to hug Jesse for a bit due to the America's Players task, and it does show a sweeter side to Jesse. April is mad at the veto choices, since she thinks Jerry and Libra suck at competitions, and she makes it clear when Libra is in the HOH room with the crew. Libra tells them to not doubt her, and feels doubted after April makes her comments known, which causes Libra to leave, and April complains about Libra coming up with every excuse in the book for the competition she loses. Keisha goes downstairs, and Libra talks about how disrespected she felt by April, and Keisha vents to Libra about how April has been disrespected and doubting her, especially with the Memphis situation. Jesse overhears it and claims Libra is yelling, which isn't happening, and reports it back to April and Ollie. April is ready to confront them, and Ollie isn't going to stop her. So she goes in the room to speak to Keisha and Libra. Libra tells April that she is upset, and April is upset too, but she didn't yell at her like Libra claimed. Libra is confused and shocked by this, as Libra never said that April yelled at her. And April's also upset. Keisha mentioned that April is making the Memphis situation like the Steven situation. Libra mentions that she didn't say April yelled at her, and who do they need to speak to clear this up? Keisha mentions that she didn't mention Memphis or Steven, which is a lie, and April's just focusing on the Libra situation right now, which pissed Keisha off, who leaves and rants to everyone in the kitchen about it. As April and Libra are hashing it out, Keisha yells that she has proven herself time and time again and stood up for April, but she's sick of this treatment. April mentions that she cannot have Keisha and Libra yelling at her at the same time, so she's focusing on one conversation. Keisha and Libra ask April who told her, and she says Jesse. Memphis is making fun of the situation, which Jerry tells them, but he tells Libra to shut up when she mentions that she doesn't care what Memphis thinks, and she tells him not to tell her to shut up. Renee doesn't like that Jerry's treating women like that, so causes her to snap, and she tells Memphis that Jerry is talking shit about him in the other room. Jesse and Libra end up arguing once he hears her mention his name and mentions that he is here to defend himself, and Libra tells him that she does not run him and she does not own him, and he plays victim when people bring shit back to him, with him running back and forth. She mentions that they would have heard her around the corner as she was yelling, though he's still insistent on her yelling. They go back and forth yelling at one another, and it's really good. After an awkward happy birthday to Keisha, Libra apologizes for the situation to the house and people stirring shit up, with Jesse claiming that he just heard the truth, causing Keisha and Libra to argue back and forth with him. Jesse and Libra accuse one another of being the constant drama in the house. Keisha yells at Jesse for being a little kid, flicks him off, and claiming that he did the same thing to him last week that he is doing to April, and calls him an arrogant little troublemaker prick. Libra ends up winning the competition, which is what the entire argument that started hours ago was about. But she lets Jerry keep the veto and takes the trip from Michelle, forcing Michelle to wear the leotard. We have the diary room of Michelle ranting and screaming about how everybody got good shit but her, how even needs to have her children taken away because she's a horse-slut skank for not wanting to take a letter from her kids. Michelle continues to rant about having to wear a leotard, and goes on about how she's really made a fool of, and rants to Jesse as she's putting on the leotard, and she even turns her back to the producers, pointing at her head about, this is what you're gonna get for the rest of the years! Though he tries to make her feel better by telling her that she'll look hot in it. After all of that mess happened, Jerry does not end up using the veto. Jesse feels safe, and April feels confident that Memphis will go home, where Memphis realizes that his alliance is done, so he has to start over. Keisha speaks to Libra about how Jesse is going after them, and how he doesn't add anything to the house, and Keisha hopes that April changes her mind, but they both want him gone. They ask April about sending Jesse home, and she is so not here for it, as she mentions that Memphis is playing better because he's not loud like Jesse. Libra mentions that April always gets mad when they bring this up to her, but Libra realizes that April is in a prime position, so April doesn't care. Memphis and Keisha talk about how the house is promising their games away, and we see Keisha approach Dan about voting Jesse out. We're talking to him about how they need 4 votes to Libra, where Keisha mentions that they only have Dan as the 4th vote, which causes Libra to worry. She warns Keisha that April will be furious and that the house will be split next week, so they need to prepare for the wrath. Libra tells Memphis that she is keeping him, so he better not vote her ass out next week. Well, we saw how that went. The 3 of them, as well as Dan, cheer about this flip. We do see the discussion with April and Jerry, where she's talking about Libra and Keisha wanting Jesse out, but they have enough votes to boot Memphis. Jerry approaches Dan and reminds him of the loyalty that they display to him, where he tells a sleeping Jesse that they have votes. Dan tells America that they better make the right choice on who to vote out, since he's going to be in a crap position regardless. Jesse is evicted on a 4-3 vote, as America told Dan to vote out Jesse. Jesse is just sheer dynamite and brings so much to the season, and is one of the huge reasons as to why this pre-jury is so great. He sticks out like a sore thumb in this cast, and he was such a train wreck regarding his strategy and his social skills, though you definitely see that he definitely had some potential to do better in another scenario. We just really didn't get that this season, and he was very loud, he wasn't very social, and he was just a train wreck, but he was a fun person to watch, and while he was kind of a villain in the season, you could tell he wasn't a bad person, and that's really rare sometimes, so he was a good villain. Week 5 is the storm before the calm, or the last bang, meaning that this is the last week where things really get on and popping. So Michelle is heartbroken, and Jesse tells Memphis and Michelle to stick together, which doesn't last. April is pissed off that her alliance turned on her, and Ollie as well as Jerry are also shocked with Jesse being sent home over Memphis. Keisha, Rennie, and Libra are thrilled that they pulled it off, but there is so much tension in the house. Michelle pulls off a clutch HOH win over Libra, and they're blatantly targeting one another this week, and she runs into her side's arms where they obnoxiously celebrate, and Jerry tells Dan to not swear on his cross. Dan knows that he is in some shit, so he hides in his bedroom. Michelle is talking to April in the kitchen about how Rennie made fun of her for studying for the HOH comp last night, since she was the only one that did it. Rennie overhears this, and she doesn't get why Michelle is talking about her or the situation in this matter. The two of them start going back and forth, where Michelle tells Michelle not to fuck with her, and Michelle says, "It's your problem if you take offense to it, not mine, that's your problem." And then Rennie's like, "If you say that, don't say that shit to me, don't say that bullshit to me." It's just hilarious, and Michelle's like, "What? What did I say?" And it's hilarious watching Michelle argue in a leotard. Anyways, after this ends, Michelle tells Keisha and Libra, "You can come out and you don't have to hide. Don't hide. Don't hide." Libra and Keisha storm out into the kitchen, and Libra yells that, "Now y'all best friends," to April and Michelle. April yells, "Don't get me started. If you have something to say to me, then don't be afraid to say it." And Michelle yells, "Be a liar. You're a liar." April yells at Libra for, "Swing on your children, you bitch." And Libra yells, "I don't swing my children, bitch." And then they yell in each other's faces, going back and forth. "Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't." It's just hilarious. Jerry yells, "You're going home." And that she graduated with a 1. Libra yells her education about graduating magna cum laude to Jerry after he calls her dumb. Michelle yells about Libra not wanting a letter from her children, and she doesn't care about what Libra has to say. Memphis and Libra are annoyed that Michelle brings up Dan's religion, and she doesn't believe that he is a school teacher. Dan continues to play his sad boy shtick, and he solidifies his alliance with Memphis. Michelle and Memphis speak, where they mention that they are aligned still, but Memphis is planning on playing both sides. Michelle speaks to Dan about why he did that, and if he's really a school teacher, and he continues his shtick, since he went on the wrong side. Libra doesn't know if Michelle wants them in their HOH room to see her HOH, and Michelle says that she would be offended if they didn't come up, since she wants people to see where she comes from. April is really hamming it up about how much she likes Michelle, which is annoying Memphis. Michelle's crew bash Dan and Libra, as Libra is a backstabber, Michelle is clearly still not over the vacation, and Dan bringing up his religion in everything. We see Chicken George, Bunky, Amy, June, Jace, Janelle, Bucky, Jen, and Matt, who is really flirting with Michelle from the last 9 seasons in the Have Nots competition, with Brian hosting the competition, which shows to me how much production liked him, since they don't have P. Doris hosting competitions in the same season. Really, ever, outside of this and another example in this season. Michelle and Memphis talk in the HOH room where they claim that they aren't in any alliance, and Memphis tells her not to align with April and Ollie, though he tries to protect them. Rennie bashes the bitch, April, where Keisha, Memphis, and Libra all join in on the April bashing, where they are hoping that Michelle somehow nominates her since April broke her promise of not nominating Jesse. Rennie pitches April to Michelle, but it's clear that Michelle isn't here for it. Michelle, unshockingly to no one, nominates Libra and Keisha for eviction. Dan knows his strategy is working, since he feels like he should have been on the block, and Jerry wants Dan on the block as well, but mentions of being AFP would be the only justification for Dan's move in some of their eyes. Keisha is annoyed that April's key was pulled first, and Libra tells Keisha to keep her head high, and for the others to send April to the jury house right behind her, which does happen, and to whoop their motherfucking asses. Michelle speaks to Keisha and tells her that Libra is the target, since she's the one who sent all of the evictees home. April, Ollie, and Jerry, mainly the first two, trash Libra, since April is really mad that Libra masterminded this. She didn't, and doesn't have to fake it with Libra anymore, where Ollie is glad that the block shut her up, and if they knew this, they would have nominated her week 1. Jerry tells Michelle that they need to worry about Dan, who is the most dangerous player, and he would like to take one of the nominees off the block to send Dan home. Jerry ends up winning the veto. Libra is second again in this competition, and it really sucks that her final week considered her making it second place in both of the competitions. Jerry ends up flicking off the camera, and Jerry tries to convince Michelle for them to veto Keisha to make Dan feel the heat, but Michelle knows that Libra will go home against Keisha. It is time for the feast, and most of the house is complimenting one another. Keisha jokes about the designer clothes April is getting, and April jokes that it is the only reason why Keisha is being nice to her. Libra ends up speaking to Ollie about being hurt that he called her a scallywag and a hoe during the HOH fight, and cries to him, which she didn't expect that to come from him. He does end up apologizing to her and asks her if she was the catalyst for the Jesse vote, and she says that it was Keisha. While this is happening, Michelle stirs the pot about Libra talking badly about her being Keisha at the table. The girls bring up Libra in the HOH room, and Keisha and Michelle confront Libra about this, where Libra just says that she is joking. Keisha doesn't get why she would say that, and Michelle said that she was saying it in a rude manner. Keisha ends up ranting about always being true to Libra, which is so not true. And Libra mentions that everyone has said stuff about everyone in the house, and they both deny talking about one another, and they are both lying here. And Michelle gets involved, acting like she doesn't talk about people and lying, which is also a lie. Michelle and Libra end up arguing, where Libra mentions that Ollie told her that she was the catalyst of the Jesse vote, which Michelle does not believe that Libra wasn't the catalyst. Keisha mentions that she thought Jesse was coming after her, and they got along fine before April told her things about him, which April ends up denying. April and Keisha end up going back and forth, which had nothing to do with Libra, who states that she is the fall person. Keisha leaves the room and yells at Michelle about, why don't you get out of this crazy place? Since April is so devious and people act like Libra is doing everything, though Keisha ends up bashing both Crazy April and Crazy Libra. While this was happening on the feeds, April and Libra kind of made up, but they were both complete train wrecks about the situation, and April was really hurt about Libra backstabbing her. But the conversation ended pretty nicely, and I think this would be the catalyst as to what would happen later on in the week, with April wanting to keep her. They also didn't show the huge shouting match that Libra and Michelle had in the living area about the last 4 weeks in the game, and they are both just completely delirious, and Michelle is definitely gaslighting Libra, who ends up losing her mind. Jerry calls Dan Judas in his veto speech, which shocks many, mentioning that Dan said that he was new to his religion before breaking his word in the past, and ultimately Jerry doesn't use the veto. A lot of people are turned off with Jerry's speech, though Dan is really liking this, since it makes people more sympathetic towards him. Libra knows that she's a dead woman walking, though Keisha is still a bit worried. April and Ollie talk about how she does not trust Keisha and they don't trust Keisha, and how she's just as responsible as Libra was for the last vote, but isn't getting any of the smoke for it. She mentions that Keisha never went to college, isn't prettier than her, and she needs to go, which Ollie agrees with. Dan and Memphis call their alliance the Renegades and how they need to align with Rennie and Keisha to steamroll the house. Ollie and April plot about how they can keep Libra, where they will get her to not nominate them, and Jerry will vote with them, but they need a fourth vote, and it's Dan. Again! This is actually a really good move for Ollie and April, especially since Libra wasn't close with the other side, and I do think she would have remained loyal to them at this point. They want to mention that he is the outcast with Memphis, Rennie, and Keisha. Ollie tells Libra that he and April want to keep her, and Keisha is getting way too complacent, but he wants her to speak to Dan, where Libra makes her little pitch, where it could be a split, but Michelle will vote her out in a tie. Libra is evicted in a unanimous 6-0 vote. Libra is definitely a joy to watch, and while she was definitely controlling and kind of bitchy at times, she wasn't doing anything that was any worse than anyone else in the house, but she always got the flack for everything. I definitely do think there was definitely some misogynoir involved, especially with some of the videos and the commentary from the feeds. But despite that, she definitely did have some issues with the social game, and it's why she struggled to make it to jury. But if they did keep her over Keisha, I do think that the season would have been a lot more interesting in the second half. In general, Libra is definitely one of the most interesting players in the season, and really brought a lot to it. And it really says a lot that the season got infinitely more boring as soon as she left. It really annoyed me that they, meaning production and the house guests and whatever, continuously brought up her leaving her children to do the show when they're 5 months old, though many new fathers have done this and there's no commentary on it. As long as her husband and her family had a plan to put her doing this, I don't know why they gave a fuck, simply put. Week 6 is boring, and you can definitely tell that the peak of the season in entertainment value has most definitely passed. April could not get the votes to boot Keisha and to keep Libra, and Michelle feels no ways about Libra ignoring to hug her. Rennie ends up winning HOH, and of course that side is happy, while April immediately knows that she's going on the block this week. Obviously, Ollie isn't pleased with the results, and they are starting to get annoyed, since Jerry starts to follow them around within every few minutes. Memphis and Keisha think the showmates know that they are going up, and April mentions that she's ready to campaign her ass off if she's nominated against Jerry, as he is the one that nominated Rennie in the first week. Rennie does not like how flirty Memphis and Keisha are, and she tells her that she doesn't trust Memphis. She asks Keisha if Memphis promised her something, since Memphis is the male April, do anything for money, and uses people. This worries Keisha, since she thinks Rennie might target Memphis, and Rennie mentions that there's no reason to keep Memphis around. We have a segment about April's teddy dog, which was on her bed, and they're clearly showing the house messing with her because there isn't anything else going on at this point. And you can see Libra's picture lightened up, so this clearly took place during the latter part of last week, but they're showing it here because, like I mentioned earlier, there's nothing happening. Of course, we have more Ollie and April showmance content, where they talk about being friends for life. I know they break up after like 6 or 8 months to a year, but I don't know if they remained friends afterwards. Rennie speaks to Michelle and tells her that she isn't going on the block, and Michelle is explained by Rennie that she knows what is happening with Keisha and the guys. There is a scene of Ollie running from a crow since he is scared of birds. Rennie asks Dan if he's willing to be a pawn, and Dan doesn't get the logic, since himself, Memphis, and Keisha would control the votes as to who goes home, and she asks Memphis if he's willing to be a pawn, and he mentions, hell no. They tell her that Jerry is going to go after them over her, and she asks Keisha and Michelle if they're willing to be a pawn, and of course, all of them aren't thrilled with this and don't want to be a pawn. All of them mention that they never spoke game with Ollie, which is a huge issue since they've been in that house for 5 weeks, and it shows that he hasn't developed any meaningful relationships with them. And Rennie speaks to Ollie alone about what his game plan is, where she tells him that April is the target and she and Jerry have the money, but she doesn't want to nominate him, which Ollie appreciates. Rennie nominates April and Jerry for eviction. Rennie's alliance are flabbergasted that Ollie is not nominated against April, and they think Rennie has to deal with him. She doesn't, and it would make sense for her to have a deal with Ollie, but it just shows Rennie's lack of gameplay, in my opinion. Dan and Memphis are worried that one of them will be the replacement nominee if one of the nominees win the veto. Ollie tells April to not be so down, since she's up against the best person to have a chance against in Sting, and he would win the veto to take her off the block. The trio talk about Rennie's poor choice of protecting Ollie and making them feel like crap, but the showman's hopes are up. Dan ends up winning the veto, and April knows that she's essentially screwed. April has $5,000 that she won during the veto competition 2 weeks ago, and she uses that to get Dan to veto her, but it goes nowhere. Jerry also apologizes for the Judas comments he made last week, and Dan is considering to put Ollie out, which he discusses with Memphis because he's unreadable and unpredictable, and you can see April coming from a mile away, and you know what she will do. Dan ultimately doesn't use the veto, since Rennie kind of made it clear that one of her own allies would be the replacement nominee, just by her actions. Dan mentions the monetary offer in his veto speech to throw some paranoia in the house, and it doesn't affect April at all, since she didn't offer a specific amount of money, and Jerry knows that it wasn't him who made the offer. Michelle is wondering who would offer the money, since she would want that person out. Michelle believes that it was Jerry who offered the money, and it kind of shows how off-base she is in general with her reads. Keisha mentions that she's not changing her vote since April needs to go, and Memphis agrees since people need to just go with the simple move and to not assume anything else is happening. April whines about the week being hell for her and how she hasn't done anything to anyone, as she didn't bring a word to people, and she only washes dishes and makes things for people and do good stuff. And she rants about Keisha being jealous, and it just shows how delusional April is. April knows that Dan and Michelle are the swing votes of the week, and Michelle feels like the others have a plan that they haven't told her about, and she just wants to keep April, meaning that Dan is a swing vote for the 3rd week in a row, and he doesn't like being in this position. Ollie makes his pitch to Dan for April, and she offers Dan money to get him to vote for her to stay. April is evicted in a 4-1 vote. I definitely found April to be very enjoyable, and despite her being in a showman, it definitely did not define her as a game player or a personality, which is very rare with people, especially women, who are in showmances in North American Big Brother in general. During this rewatch, I actually found myself siding with her a lot when it comes to the strategy and her rationale. Since it was kind of effed up for Keisha and Libra to flip on her, though the house gave Keisha the same respect to do what she wanted the week prior, and April is definitely more strategic than a lot of people give credit for. The issue with her is that she has very little subtlety in anything she does, and while she thought she was doing so much better than Libra socially, she really wasn't. But she knew what she needed to do to advance herself in the game more often than not, and I definitely do think that she made the season a lot more interesting, and seeing her taken out here, while kind of karmic, kind of sucked for the potential of the second half of the season and being as entertaining as it otherwise could have and should have been. Overall, I definitely enjoyed April. Week 7 is definitely an improvement over the last week and the remaining weeks of the season, as there's definitely some life given to the season. There's definitely a few memorable moments that happened, but it does not compare at all to the first 5 weeks of the season. Ollie is of course sad that April was evicted, and the house guests are competing in an endurance competition. They are allowed to throw balloons at one another, and Memphis accidentally throws one at Michelle as he was targeting Ollie, which pisses her off, so she throws one back. It just shows the deterioration of their relationship and allegiance by this point. Ollie and Dan end up being the final 2 in the competition, and a deal is made, as they try to get one another to drop, but it doesn't work. But Dan mentions that he'll give Ollie the option to give someone else protection and to give most of the HOH powers to Ollie pertaining nominations, where he picks a nominee and the veto replacement. This does cause Ollie to drop, and he mentions that Michelle will be the protected one, and for Dan to get the HOH. Keisha speaks to Memphis about how they clearly made a deal, and she thinks it is to protect someone, and Ollie mentioned Michelle. Great instincts on Keisha's part. Ollie and Michelle speaks about this, and he doesn't trust Dan, but Ollie tells Michelle about the 3 parts deal that he isn't even supposed to tell anyone. protect the person, choose a nominee, and choose the replacement nominee if it ends up happening. Dan tells Memphis that he made a deal, and Memphis repeats this to Rennie and Keisha. Ollie speaks to Dan about the deal, and he expects Dan to nominate Jerry, but Ollie mentions that he would like Memphis nominated, which is a risk to Dan since Memphis is his closest ally, and Memphis could turn on him. Memphis pretty much predicts what this conversation was about, and then speaks to Rennie and Keisha about keeping Memphis if he's on the block, but Keisha mentions that she can't be sure Rennie would vote to keep Memphis. And this happened before Rennie even entered the room. Dan tries to propose a final four, and Rennie outright tells Dan that she doesn't trust Memphis, as he is cutthroat. Dan proposes a final three with Keisha and Rennie, and Memphis tells Dan that this is a really dumb idea. Dan nominates Jerry and Memphis for eviction. Memphis is pissed off that he was nominated by his closest ally, rightfully so, and Ollie is happy that the deal went through. Dan also tells Memphis that the final part of the deal is that Ollie gets to choose a replacement nominee, but Memphis questions what happens if Ollie wins the veto, and takes Jerry down, where Dan replies that Michelle is going up. Dan mentions in the diary room that Ollie is a fool for thinking that the deal is going to go through, and it is too good to be true. Dan also tells Keisha and Rennie that Michelle is going up if the veto is used, and they predict that Ollie and Michelle have an alliance. Ollie ends up telling Jerry and Michelle the final part of the deal, which is the replacement nominee, where he trusts Dan. Jerry doesn't trust the deal whatsoever, and Michelle seems pretty unsure herself. A lot of the episode is spent on Jerry being given a phone call from America, and Keisha, Dan, and Memphis talking about what Michelle would do if she went to HOH, as it would be one of them going home. And Memphis mentions that 2 weeks ago he would be sure that she wouldn't vote him out, but isn't sure about that now. But they know that she is a tough competitor who needs to go. Memphis ends up winning the veto, though Dan wanted Keisha to win the veto, just so he can have the extra security blanket of not having to nominate his allies, and talks about Michelle being a loose cannon and a bitch. This is what Memphis said, even if she's your friend and they're not scared of Ollie. Dan tells his allies about the third part of the deal, where either Keisha or Rennie is supposed to go up, but he tells them that it isn't going to happen. He tells them that Michelle is going on the block and that she's going to freak out. Ollie speaks to Dan about the final part of the deal, and he tells Dan that he wants Keisha on the block, while admitting to Dan that he is nervous about this. Dan decides to create a game called Replacement Nominee Roulette, where he will get each of the other Huskers to mention the name of the others for who they want the replacement nominee to be. So, when he breaks his word, people will be more mad at one another than at him. At the ceremony, Michelle names Keisha, Keisha names Michelle, Ollie names Rennie, and Rennie names Ollie. Dan breaks his word to Ollie and Michelle and nominates Michelle as the replacement nominee. Of course, Michelle's pissed off because the fucking plant got her. And he thinks she is stupid on the fucking head. You guys think I was stupid on my fucking forehead? I know what the fuck's going on here. That's the fucking plant. And it's just hilarious watching her infamous diary room meltdown. And it's the last one we're going to get from her. Ollie and Michelle lose their minds after the ceremony. Ollie and Michelle read about them being a snake and a plant, and Jerry plans to not say anything, since he knows that Michelle will self-destruct. Smart move on Jerry's part. Ollie and Michelle go outside, where Ollie rants about the other parts of the deal, and Keisha is mad that they turned on her. And Michelle yells that he told her to say her name. Keisha, Dan told me to say your fucking name. The fucking plant. Michelle yells that the football picture in his HOH room is fake, and no one cares to hear about Ollie's deal, as Dan walks upstairs to his HOH room, since his thing is to avoid conflict at all times. Memphis and Ollie start arguing since he doesn't care since Memphis is off the block, and Ollie ends up calling him a red-head carrot-back kid, which pisses Memphis off. Keisha doesn't care because Ollie and Michelle wanted her up and she's not up, where they tell Ollie that they knew about the deal the entire time. Ollie feels like people took advantage of him being nice the entire season, and he speaks to Dan alone, who tells Ollie that it was just a game. Michelle gives Dan a piece of her mind since she was the only one that didn't screw him over, and she knows that she's going home, despite him not giving her more answers. Ollie throws the lollipops across the room, and he throws a bunch of stuff everywhere, as he's just really pissed off. Michelle is evicted in a 3-1 vote. I can't say that I really liked Michelle much, but she did bring a lot of the drama, and she had many comedic moments throughout the season, so she definitely had some pizzazz here and there. And I do think she played way too personally at times where I think if she was more strategic and wasn't so easily blinded, she could have been a very strong player. But Michelle definitely contributed to the season, and I appreciated her contributions, even if she was far from the most likable person in the season. And it's no surprise that after she left, the season really becomes boring, like watching molasses, since none of the others have really engaging personalities that would be enough to spice things up at this point in time. Damn near everyone speaks warmly about Michelle in the diary rooms about her eviction, except for Memphis, who cherishes her despite her being one of his earliest allies. It is a double eviction, and Keisha wins the HOH and nominates Ollie and Jerry for eviction, obviously. Dan wins the veto and doesn't use it. Ollie is evicted in a unanimous 3-0 vote and bolts out of the house in hilarious fashion. Honestly, it's kind of sad that Ollie was the last successful black male house guest pertaining to the game up until the diversity quota era that we are now in and only started a few years ago. He was in a good position in week 1, and I think he handled the whole Brian situation poorly, but he should have kept his alliance with the women and his other alliance with Dan and Brian for as long as he could have. But after he dismantled his first alliance, he just kind of coasted off of the work April was doing. And the other house guests even mentioned that they didn't have any game talk with him, so he wasn't seen as an individual player. Outside of that, he was kind of alright and annoying, so kind of mid overall. So whatever type of life and interest that week 7 brought to the season completely disappeared for good with week 8 and onwards. I don't even have anything else to say about it, and I want to get over this week as quickly as possible, though you think that an underdog winning an HOH will cause it to be an interesting week, but this is proof that it doesn't always work out like that. People are getting tired of Jerry and his rambling, so they are actively trying to avoid him, as they all see it as a cakewalk to the Final Four. We have a scene of Dan and Rennie arguing about time zones, and it is very funny, where there's another scene of the house guests making fun of Keisha's hyena laugh. Despite the odds, Jerry ends up winning the HOH, and the Final Four won't make it to the Final Four together. Jerry continues to rumble on about some story when he gets his HOH room, and absolutely no one cares. Memphis essentially makes 2 Final Twos, one with Keisha and one with Dan, though he doesn't want to explicitly state it as a Final Two to Keisha. The girls think that he is going to nominate them, and Rennie mentions that Jerry's best move is to nominate one person from each gender. Memphis and Dan talk about how they're going to get out of this week, and Memphis realizes that he has to make a deal with Jerry to ensure that he and Dan aren't nominated against one another. Memphis and Jerry make a Final Two deal where Jerry mentions that he wants Dan gone, and Memphis took being nominated by Dan last week personally, though of course he is definitely selling this to Jerry. Jerry ends up nominating Dan and Keisha for eviction. Keisha is told that she is a pawn, but she doesn't believe it, and Memphis wants to get rid of Rennie, since she is the only person he does not have a Final Two deal with. Dan and Jerry kind of BS one another in their conversation about dancing around the obvious that Jerry is targeting Dan, and Rennie is told by Jerry that if Memphis takes Dan off, then they will probably send her home, which causes her to panic to Keisha, which annoys her, but Rennie would be proven right, and Jerry is also proven right here as well. Nothing is happening in the house at this point, so we are shown Dan mocking Rennie, where he's intentionally driving her wild so she will be distracted in the veto competition, and Rennie is slowly starting to get over Dan's antics. Memphis wins the veto, and he is lying about not using the veto. Memphis tells Dan that if he wins HOH, he cannot nominate him, where Rennie and Keisha know that one of them is going home. Keisha asks Memphis what he is going to do, and he tells her that he is vetoing Dan, but she does not trust Dan, essentially. Memphis tells Jerry that he is worried about Rennie, and Jerry mentions that Rennie cannot win the game, while Dan can. Memphis backstabs Jerry by vetoing Dan, and Jerry has no choice but to nominate Rennie, since there's literally no one else. Jerry is annoyed that he is alone yet again, and the women are sad that one of them will be going home. Jerry and Keisha speak in his HOH room, and he tells Keisha that the two guys are planning to go to the Final Two together, and that Memphis has an agreement with one another. But it sounds like Jerry is trying to make a Final Two with Keisha. So pretty much he's saying that Memphis and Jerry had a Final Two, and Memphis also has one with Dan. Rennie tells Keisha that she thinks Dan and Memphis are in a final two together and that they're both very shrewd. Jerry makes a pitch to Dan, which is essentially the same pitch that he made to Keisha, and they both end up telling Memphis about this, where Memphis is warned by Dan to be careful with Keisha because she's starting to pick things up and it could screw them over. Rennie and Keisha talk about their bond and how it will be different. They will be different outside of the house, my bad, in addition to how they will never forget one another. And it's unfortunate that they don't remain close after the season, allegedly due to Rennie being jealous that Keisha won AFP from this season. Rennie is evicted in a unanimous 2-0 vote. Rennie is a prime example as to why they should cast more older people in the house, since it brings a completely different dynamic. You get a different perspective that makes an interesting puzzle piece with a cast. Rennie was just so full of life, and she was so chaotic at times as well, though you can tell deep down that she's a very good woman. Strategically, there really isn't much there, but she was a character, and she did her job well as a character, and made the season a lot better. Week 9 is the prototypical bros before hoes endgame week, so there really isn't much to say here. The Renegades felt like Rennie would have won the game had she made it to the final two, though I don't know if there's any actual confirmation about this from the other jurors. Dan wins the HOH, and Keisha is a bit worried because she thinks that Dan is closer to Memphis than he is to herself. They get a few clues for an upcoming luxury competition, and Keisha is not handling being alone with Rennie's eviction very well, where the boys tell her that she's going to be in the final three with them. Jerry is grasping at straws from anyone, where he tells Memphis that the jury mentioned that they would vote for a woman to win. Jesse returns to the house in a gorilla costume, and this is the second time in the season where in the series, where a pre-juror returns for a comp, and it shows why he and Brian were options to return in Big Brother 11. They didn't realize that it was Jesse until he did his poses and made the old man noise at Jerry while seeing the glove by his eviction picture, or memory wall picture. Dan is allowed to take someone in the house or in the jury house for a day out on vacation, and he chooses Michelle since he's hoping that it will bury the hatchet, since he sent her home and she had a trip taken from her earlier in the season. He tells the houseists that he could take someone else or take himself, hiding the jury detail from them, since they will be envious. Dan tells Memphis that he wants to nominate him to hide their alliance, since Keisha is already suspicious. Dan nominates Memphis and Jerry for eviction. Dan and Memphis come up with a plan that no matter who wins the veto out of Keisha and Jerry, Memphis can influence Jerry to boot Keisha, and Dan can influence Keisha to vote out Jerry. Jerry tells Memphis that he better not play him for a fool, and Memphis of course trushes Jerry to Dan, where the best case scenario is for Memphis to win the veto. Dan takes Michelle to the private island, and she knows that he's trying to butter her up for a vote, but he tells her the truth about his entire alliance, knowing that she was going up, and she tells him how devastated she was when it happened. Michelle pretty much mentions that the jury is pretty much set if the finals consists of himself and Memphis. Memphis wins the final veto of the season that Dan throws, and they talk about voting Keisha out, since Jerry is an easier floater to boot. Keisha has a gut feeling that they are going to evict her, and it really pisses her off, so she asks them to tell her upright if they're going to vote her out, and their facial reactions immediately gives it away. She tells them to just tell her since she doesn't appreciate being blindsided, and mentions that she would not give the person who voted her out her jury vote, and will sway the jury against them. Memphis ends up telling her the truth, causing her to rant about how they knew about this the entire time, and how she's so stupid for keep getting around. And they're all of a sudden quiet. It hurts because she's being sent home over Jerry. And Dan ends up doing some great jury management on his end, as he blames everything on Memphis, but she knows her great reads took her this far, so she isn't lying about this. It reminds me of how Ryan and Adam ended up playing the endgame of last season, but Adam did a lot better work with the jurors compared to Ryan, and the same result that happened there will happen here. Memphis takes himself off the block and votes to evict Keisha, where Dan whispers in her ear that he took Michelle on the trip and that she needs to help him secure Michelle's jury vote. Keisha was definitely a rootable person and a player throughout the season, and she was definitely a surprise since she knew very little about the game, and while all of her choices weren't actively strategic, she definitely did have a good gut instinct and reads on people, and she used those to change things around, even if sometimes there were influenced by her emotions. At the same time, I do feel like she played victim with a lot of the situations and was able to skate by many different situations because of it. Overall, she contributed a lot to the Covenant Alliance and the greatness of the season, though I will say that once she stuck with Dan and Memphis, her agency in the game deteriorated quickly and she became a lot less interesting as well. Overall, I can definitely see why she won America's Favorite Player. Dan and Memphis have a fake argument about Keisha's eviction, so Jerry can think that they aren't going to take one another to the end. The plan was for Memphis to throw part 1 to Dan, but Memphis holds on, which annoys Dan, and Memphis doesn't want to make it look bad to Jerry. Memphis ends up winning part 2 of the final HOH, and Dan wins part 3 of the final HOH, becoming the final HOH of the season and voting to evict Jerry. It's definitely interesting seeing how an older person in Jerry navigates through the house. And even though Rennie is an older woman, he's like 20 years older than Rennie, so their experiences were even different. In general, Jerry was definitely a grumpy man throughout the entire season and was very belligerent and threw out a lot of off comments, though he was definitely entertaining with some of his antics throughout the season as well. He was shockingly pretty solid to good at competitions throughout the season, which I don't think anyone was expecting. But strategically, there really isn't a whole lot to say there, though he had his moments. And he was kind of a coaster throughout the entire season, since no one really took him as a serious ally or really included him in much of anything. So he kind of just skated to the end, despite winning a few competitions here and there. I really don't have much to say about the final week. It's the standard final 2 where the obvious winner wins and the obvious loser loses. Though I hate that this is the final time that the normal jury questioning format would take place in the manner that it takes place here. As for the rest of the seasons after this, it's all done live and in a few minutes, which really makes for a poor quality jury questioning from 2009 up until the present. Libra asks Dan about his most strategic move, and he mentions backdooring Michelle, since she could beat him in competitions and in the final 2. April asks Memphis about their lack of a relationship and why should she vote for him, and responds that they got separated in the beginning of the game and never got back together, so he never gave her a front about anything, since he's a straight shooter. Michelle asks Dan why he chose her to go on the vacation, and calls him out for mentioning during the trip that it was his alliance's idea instead of his. Dan responds that he played the dirtiest with her, so he wanted to make amends with her, and he mentions that the original plan to backdoor her was his, but he needed his allies to vote her out. Michelle asks Memphis about how they were in an alliance together, but it only benefited him and not her, so why should she give him her vote when he didn't even win in HOH, and he told her that he threw some. Memphis responds that it benefited him to not win HOHs, and he knew that he could not beat her in a lot of competitions, so he took the opportunity to send her home. Ali asks Dan about their deal and why would he put his girlfriend's name in it, and Dan responds that he had only 5 minutes left in the competition, so he threw anything at the wall to get Ali to drop, and knew how much Ali loved his family, religion, etc. Rennie asks Memphis about one thing he did in the game for her, and responds by that he gave himself to her, and denies plotting behind her back. Yeah. Keisha asks Memphis why did he pick Jerry over her when they were very close, and he responds that it was the hardest move for him to make in the season, but it made sense on a game standpoint, and it bothers him that it might have ruined a friendship for good. Jerry asks Dan about showing arrogance when he won competitions, and asks if he has respect for anyone in the jury house, where Dan says he respects everyone in the jury house, and he didn't mean to be disrespectful. But when he won his first HOH, it was one of the few times he showed his emotions. Jerry asks Memphis if he would have chosen himself or Dan had he won the final HOH, and Memphis mentions that he couldn't have made that choice unless he was there, so he's skirting around the question essentially. And Dan throws Memphis under the bus about him not wanting to win the final HOH. Memphis's final speech is about making a business plan on how to get to the end and playing an asset into everyone's games, and he claims he only threw 2 HOH competitions, but he fed no BS to anyone, which is how he is in real life. Dan's final speech is about seeing a lot of big personalities and big athletes and smart people where he didn't excel in anything, so he had to be as creative and unthink people, so he aligned with Memphis, who wasn't going to do anything that didn't benefit himself. So he did the Russian roulette move to make haters for himself in the jury, which would make Memphis feel comfortable with taking him to the end. Dan wins the season in a unanimous 7-0 vote, and this is the first time this happens in BB history. It's so interesting watching Memphis now since BB22 has happened, since the last time I rewatched the season was before BB22 was ever a thing. So a lot of things about him just looks funny in hindsight. As a character, he definitely wasn't the most interesting. He was very deadpan and dry with how he handled people and how he handled things, but he did have his few interesting moments. As a player, I do think he's a pretty good or solid player, and knew how to execute his moves and always thought ahead, which a lot of people in the season didn't do. But he was definitely missing the emotional factor of the game, which is why he ended up losing, and I don't know who he would win against, to be honest. But I do think he played a better game than Ryan last season, where they essentially filled the same role, in my opinion. Dan is a weird one to me, especially during this rewatch. He definitely gets a lot of camera time, but for some reason, I almost dreaded watching him since I found so many of the other people in the cast a lot more interesting than he did. And it's weird that I felt this way because obviously he is the legend, but I didn't find him to be very interesting in the season. He was definitely very likable in the season, and he definitely knew when to play things up and when to tone himself down, so that I appreciate. And with him, I realize it's not he himself who is very interesting, but the moves he made and the chaos he creates is what makes interesting TV. But in general, he was definitely a very good winner, and the game he played was very well executed and well intended. It became clear that he was outplaying everyone else from like week 5 or week 6 onwards, so while his win was a good one, it was very predictable. Big Brother 10 definitely brought home a lot of the simplistic stuff from Big Brother 2 and Big Brother 3, pertaining its casting and the lack of twists, which gave it an old school vibe that makes it great, but it also has the more modern-ish effects, gameplay, pacing, so on and so forth, that makes this an easier rewatch than those 2 seasons. The first 5 weeks of the season are so electric and are some of the best weeks in BB history, but the latter 5 weeks, especially week 6, week 8 to week 10, are not very strong, and they were more boring during this rewatch than I remembered. So when I rank all the seasons, I don't know if this is going to be the highest of the high, but I'll get to that later. This season was definitely a fun ride to relive and to rewatch, and I'm looking forward to ranking the cast based on their gameplay, and BB11 will definitely be an interesting one. Thank you all for following me on this journey, and I'll be back soon. Take care!